The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the Parkhurst Hotel ballroom in downtown Chicago was the smell, fresh lilies, and polished marble, the kind of scent that carried money and meaning. The chandelier lights shimmered over rows of silver chairs, the buffet stood untouched, and the sound of my heels echoed like small, sharp questions in the silence. I checked my phone again, expecting a flood of texts or even a message saying, "We're running late." There was nothing. The time on my watch read 6:58 p.m. I was early, but only by 2 minutes. I'd planned this reunion down to every detail: the $8,600 ballroom reservation, the catering, the live band, even the engraved name cards. My family was nowhere in sight. I stood by the door, waiting, pretending for a moment that they'd just stepped outside for pictures, or maybe got delayed by traffic. But the minutes stretched and no one came. The air felt colder than it should have, the kind of chill that crawls under your skin when you already know the truth but refuse to face it. I walked toward the buffet, tracing my fingers along the crystal dishes of shrimp cocktail and the untouched dessert trays. I'd signed every check, paid every invoice, handled every arrangement because I thought maybe this time I could bring us together. Maybe this time they'd see me not as the unstable one but as the daughter who tried. I called my mother's number. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. "Mom, it's me. I'm here at the ballroom. Where is everyone?" I waited for a reply that never came. 10 minutes later, I checked the hotel's front desk, hoping maybe they had changed the schedule. The receptionist looked uncomfortable, glancing down at the computer before saying softly, "Ma'am, I think your party moved their event to the Winford Club. They canceled this reservation about an hour ago." My heart froze. Cancelled? But I paid for this. She hesitated. "The card we have on file, yours, was still charged." The manager approved the transfer under the same booking name. I thanked her mechanically and walked out before she could finish. The night air outside hit me like a slap. Across the street, the lights of the Winford Club glowed gold through the windows. I could almost picture them. My mother Patricia in her emerald shawl, my father Henry nursing his bourbon, and my sister Madison with her practiced laugh and perfect hair, pretending I didn't exist. They had done it again. Quiet exclusion disguised as a misunderstanding. I stood under the awning of the Parkhurst, watching limousines glide by, and felt the sting of every betrayal I'd buried over the years. It wasn't the first time they'd moved things behind my back. When I was 25, my mother used my credit card to remodel her kitchen, calling it a temporary charge she never repaid. When I was 29, my father forged my signature on a home equity loan for the Michigan Lake house. Madison called it a family adjustment, as if identity theft were just another sibling prank. They told everyone I was unstable when I tried to fight it, painting me as the problem so they could keep their lie clean. Inside that hollow ballroom, I'd thought I was hosting a reunion. But standing outside, looking at the glimmering building across the street, I realized I'd been written out of my own family's story long ago. They just hadn't bothered to tell me. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking. The city lights blurred against the damp pavement, and the sound of my footsteps mixed with the hum of passing cars. I ended up at the Riverwalk, leaning against the railing, watching the water move in dark waves under the bridges. My reflection looked different that night. Tired, yes, but sharper too. There was anger, but beneath it, a strange calm. I'd spent years chasing their approval, trying to buy belonging with money, with patience, with silence. Now all I felt was the steady pulse of clarity. They had used me, my finances, my name, my good credit, and left me with nothing but apologies that came too late or not at all. But tonight, something in me shifted. The humiliation burned off into resolve. If they wanted to erase me, I would make sure the record said otherwise. When I got home to my small apartment in Evanston, I poured a glass of water and opened my laptop. I found the email from the hotel confirming the payment in my name, then attached every receipt I'd saved since the planning began. My hands shook, but not from sadness, from focus. I created a new folder on my desktop and titled it Family Records. It would become the beginning of my ledger, the truth they couldn't rewrite. I sat back, the city quiet outside my window, and thought of every lie they told. How Patricia once told me, family is everything, until you turn against it. How Madison smirked when she said I was lucky to still be included. How Henry refused to speak to me after I questioned the missing trust fund money Grandpa left me. I used to cry over those words, but not anymore. They were evidence, now, proof of a pattern that had cost me more than money. It had cost me years of peace. By the time midnight came, I had sorted through every transaction, cross-checking it with emails and credit statements. Each one told the same story: manipulation, deceit, control. They'd stolen not just my funds but my dignity. And now I was done pretending it didn't happen. Before shutting down my laptop, I wrote one final line in the document. They erase me tonight, but tomorrow, I begin again. Then I closed the lid and sat in silence, letting the weight of the night settle. The ballroom was empty, but my resolve was not. Something inside me had awakened in that hollow room, the quiet decision to stop seeking permission to exist. When morning came, I wouldn't call them. I wouldn't beg for answers. I'd start with numbers, receipts, and facts. Because if family is built on lies, then truth becomes its most powerful inheritance. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of my Evanston apartment, landing across a half-empty cup of coffee and the scattered papers on my table. I hadn't slept much, but I didn't need to. Something inside me had turned steady, focused, almost mechanical. The humiliation from the night before had burned into a single purpose: to document everything. If my family wanted to twist the truth, I would counter them with evidence, clear, dated, and undeniable. I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet. The blank cells glowed like a promise. At the top, I typed the ledger in bold letters. It was a name that felt right, almost sacred. In the first row, I entered date, transaction, amount, purpose, beneficiary, proof. Then I began to fill it in. The first charge was easy to find. March 14th, $12,000. Wedding planning, Madison Clark, Visa 4489. That wedding planner payment had appeared months ago, supposedly a joint gift from the family. Only later did I discover it had been charged to my card without permission. Next came a line for June 2nd, $8,300, dental procedure, Patricia Clark, American Express 3150. The receipt had a spa's name in Naples, Florida. My mother had called it a medical necessity. I added another for September 11th, $3,900, home furnishings, Henry Clark, Discover 7902, and noted, purchase new outdoor furniture for the Michigan Lake House. By the time I finished the first hour, my chest felt heavy, but not with grief, with clarity. For years, I'd tried to explain these things to relatives who smiled politely and said, families share accounts all the time. What they never understood was that these weren't shared expenses. They were thieves, buried beneath guilt and control. I dug through my email history next, tracing confirmation messages, online statements, and receipts I had almost deleted in anger. The paper trail stretched back 7 years. I found Madison's name listed as an authorized user on my account, something I had never approved. She had used it for travel to London, clothes from Bergdorf Goodman, and even Uber rides in cities I'd never been to. Every discovery felt like a new betrayal, but also a puzzle piece falling into place. By afternoon, I had 57 entries. I printed them, hole-punched each page, and slid them into a black binder I labeled with masking tape. Evidence A. I kept the tone of my notes detached, almost clinical, as if I were preparing a report rather than reclaiming my life. But beneath that detachment ran a current of quiet rage. Around 6, I called my coworker and closest friend, Tessa. She had known about some of what my family had done, but not the full extent. When I told her about the hotel cancellation, she swore softly. That's insane, Lila. You need to report this. I hesitated. To whom? The police? They'll laugh it off as a family dispute. No, she said firmly. To legal aid. I know someone there who handles financial exploitation cases. She'll listen. 2 days later, I walked into the legal aid center of Cook County with my binder pressed against my chest. The waiting room was quiet except for the buzz of an old fluorescent light. A woman in her 40s with short hair and sharp eyes called my name. "I'm Carla Hendricks," she said, extending her hand. "Let's see what you've got." I sat across from her and opened the binder. She leafed through each page slowly, stopping to study a few of the statements, highlighting details with her pen. After about 20 minutes, she looked up. "This isn't just a misunderstanding," she said. "This is identity theft. Multiple counts. And because they're relatives, it's also a form of financial abuse." The words landed like thunder. Identity theft. She said it so plainly, as if naming it finally gave it shape. "They've been using your credit for years," she added. "And the paper trail is solid. You did the right thing documenting it." I nodded, struggling to keep my voice steady. "They told everyone I was unstable," I said quietly. "That I made things up." Carla smiled in that calm, professional way. "They can't rewrite bank records, Lila. Numbers don't lie." For the first time in years, I felt believed. She walked me through the steps, filing an official police report, submitting a claim to each credit bureau, freezing my accounts, and creating an affidavit to challenge the fraudulent debts. I wrote every instruction in neat bullet points, as if each task were another brick in the wall between me and them. That night, I sat at my desk again, the city lights flickering outside. I composed formal letters to Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, attaching photocopies of the fraud statements. I uploaded a digital copy of my police report, stamped with the Chicago Police Department seal. Then I froze all my cards, opened a new checking account, and scheduled password changes for every platform I used. I stayed awake until dawn, the hum of my printer the only sound in the room. When it was done, I stared at the pile of documents and felt something like peace. Not happiness, not yet, but control, the kind they could no longer take from me. The silence from my family grew louder in those days. No calls, no emails, not even a text from Madison pretending to check in. I realized they must have sensed something was coming. They had always counted on my silence, my tendency to avoid conflict, to forgive. But now I had a file full of facts, and facts had no mercy. On the fifth night, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. It was my father's voice, measured, defensive. "Lila, your mother's upset. Whatever nonsense you've started, end it before it gets ugly. We're family. Don't destroy that over paperwork." I played it twice, then saved it in a new folder labeled Evidence B. The next morning, I printed my credit freeze confirmations and tucked them beside the ledger. Then, with quiet finality, I zipped the binder closed. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, hands folded on the table, knowing that the girl who once begged her family to see her was gone. In her place sat a woman who would no longer ask for love that had conditions. A woman who knew that silence protected no one but the guilty. 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and silence. I spent my days working at the marketing firm and my nights refining my documentation. The binder that once held 57 pages now had over 100. Every charge, every bank statement, every forged form was labeled, tabbed, and cross-referenced. I'd built my case not just to defend myself, but to make sure they could never rewrite the story again. Then, on a gray Wednesday morning, my cousin Daniel called. His voice shook a little, like someone carrying guilt too long. "Lila, I overheard your mom and dad talking," he said. "They're saying you're trying to destroy the family's reputation. They're telling people you're unhinged again." I closed my eyes. The word again burned. They'd used it before, when I asked about the missing trust fund, when I refused to co-sign Madison's loan, when I asked why my name was missing from the family estate. Every truth I spoke was called a breakdown. Daniel hesitated before adding, "Look, I knew some of what they were doing. The credit cards, the house loan." I didn't say anything. I should've. "I'm sorry." His apology caught me off guard. "You can still make it right," I said quietly. "Help me prove it." He agreed without hesitation. That night, with Daniel's help, I drafted something that wasn't emotional or vengeful. It was professional. I wrote a detailed invoice listing every fraudulent charge, including dates, card numbers, and references to supporting documents. At the top, I titled it Formal Notice of Repayment and Legal Action. The total came to $143,780, a number that represented not only stolen money but stolen trust, stolen years. Before sending it, I sat at my desk staring at the email window for nearly an hour. Then, with steady hands, I typed their names into the two-line: Patricia Clark, Henry Clark, and Madison Clark. In the subject, I wrote, Formal Notice of Repayment and Legal Action. At the bottom of the email, I attached PDF files, the ledger, the police report, and the attorney's letter confirming pending investigation. I hit send. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing. My mother's name appeared first. "Lila, what are you doing?" she hissed when I answered. "You can't air private matters like this. You'll humiliate us all." "Private matters?" I repeated. "You forged my signature. You drained my accounts." "That's an exaggeration," she snapped. "You're overreacting again." I hung up. Then my father called. His voice was cold, measured, the way it always got when he felt cornered. "You're making a fool of yourself. Take this nonsense back before it reaches the family lawyer." "I'm not taking anything back," I said. "I'm done covering for you." He exhaled sharply. "You're embarrassing us publicly, Lila. Is that what you want? To ruin your own name?" I smiled faintly at the irony. "You already did that for me years ago." By evening, Madison texted, "You're pathetic. I'll file for defamation if you don't stop this." I screenshotted the message, attached it to my folder, and forwarded everything to Carla. Her reply came fast. "Do not engage. Let documentation speak." 3 days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. My name printed neatly, my father's law firm's return address stamped at the corner. Inside was a retaliatory complaint accusing me of misappropriation of shared family funds. They were trying to turn the story upside down. I sat at my kitchen table, reading it line by line, my pulse steady. Carla had warned me this would happen. "Retaliation is always the last defense of the guilty," she'd said. I called her immediately. "They filed," I told her. "Good," she replied. "Now we get to show the truth." We filed a counterclaim that same afternoon. Every transaction they listed as mine was matched with receipts, timestamps, and electronic approvals traced to their IP addresses. When I saw the final version of the legal response, I realized how impossible it would be for them to lie their way out. My evidence was precise, airtight, and devastating. A week later, I received an email from Daniel. "They want to meet you. At the old house. Sunday at 2. I hesitated before replying. "Fine. But I'm not coming alone." I asked Carla to accompany me, not as a lawyer that day, but as a witness. The house in Oak Park looked the same as it always had: white brick, black shutters, the magnolia tree blooming in the yard. For years, I'd walked through that door feeling like a guest in my own home. This time, I walked in with my head high and my binder tucked under my arm. Patricia sat on the sofa, Henry in his armchair, and Madison by the window, arms crossed. They expected tears. They got silence. Henry was the first to speak. "We didn't want it to come to this, Lila. You're forcing our hand." I opened the binder slowly, the sound of the zipper filling the room. "Forcing your hand?" I repeated. "You forged mine." Madison rolled her eyes. "You're really going to drag us through the mud for some credit card bills?" I slid the first folder across the table. "Those bills total $143,000, and they're backed by verified documents." Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "You're ruining the family's name. After all we did for you." I met her gaze. "You didn't do this for me. You did it to me." She fell silent. Carla took out her notepad, but didn't speak. The tension sat thick in the air. I placed the final envelope, the itemized invoice, on the coffee table. "I'm not here for forgiveness," I said quietly. "I'm here to return your silence. You built it for years, and now I'm giving it back." My father looked away, muttering something about family loyalty, but I stood up before he could finish. I'd heard every version of their excuses before, and none of them mattered anymore. I gathered my things, turned to Daniel, who stood in the doorway looking torn, and nodded once. "I'm done," As I walked out, my mother called after me, her voice trembling. "If you do this, you'll lose us forever." I didn't turn around. Then consider it a fair trade. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I stopped on the porch for a moment, letting the quiet settle in my chest. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or powerless. I felt steady. The truth was mine again, and this time, I intended to keep it. A month after the confrontation, the noise began to fade. The constant stream of calls, threats, and guilt-laced messages from my family had slowed to silence. The legal proceedings moved forward, steady and deliberate, handled mostly by Carla and her firm. I no longer felt the need to monitor every update or chase every reaction. My life had shrunk to something smaller, but within that smallness, I found something I'd never had before: peace. I rented a small white cottage near Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The front porch faced the water, and the mornings smelled of pine and rain. My days had a rhythm now: coffee at sunrise, quiet walks to the nearby dock, freelance work from my laptop, and evenings spent reading or cooking simple meals. I'd traded drama for solitude, and it suited me. I stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped explaining myself to people who were never listening anyway. Daniel called every few days, his voice always hesitant, like he was afraid to disturb my calm. "Madison's furious," he told me one afternoon. "Your mom says she can't sleep. And your dad, he's talking about settling things quietly before the lawyers drag it out." I smiled faintly. "They can keep their money," I said. "Just not my name." He didn't argue. I could hear the wind from his car window, the long pause before he said, "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do," I said. "For once, I want my life unlinked from theirs. No more guilt, no more shared anything." He sighed. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for, Lila." "No," I replied softly. "I just got tired of being weak." After we hung up, I sat on the porch with my mug of tea, watching the sun drop over the lake. It shimmered in gold and pink hues, the water calm and forgiving. I thought about how many years I'd spent craving validation from people who had only ever seen me as convenient. For so long, I'd mistaken their silence for peace, but now I knew better. True peace came from letting go, not of love, but of illusion. Weeks later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was an official notice from the court: investigation complete. Fraud confirmed. I read it twice, slowly. My hands trembled, not from shock, but from release. The words weren't dramatic or emotional, just factual. They stated what I had known all along. My family's actions were now matters of record, not rumor. Justice didn't roar. It whispered, steady and undeniable. I took the letter inside and laid it on the table beside my binder, the ledger. The same binder that had once represented pain now stood as proof of resilience. I opened it for the last time, flipping through the pages that had once consumed me. Every number, every document, every screenshot felt like a chapter in an old life I no longer lived. I reached the final blank page and wrote one last entry: peace, priceless. When I closed the binder, I felt something inside me unclench. I didn't need revenge or inheritance or anyone's apology. I needed distance, and now I had it. That evening, I drove into town, bought a bottle of wine, and sat by the lakeshore with a small bonfire crackling nearby. The stars reflected off the water, and the air carried that faint Wisconsin chill that always came early in autumn. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of explanation pressing down on me. My mind wandered, not to the past, but to possibilities. Maybe I'd move to Seattle one day, open a small design studio, or travel through Europe. Maybe I'd stay here, build a new circle, something simple and honest. The future didn't scare me anymore because I no longer owed anyone an explanation for it. I wasn't someone's scapegoat or financial backup or emotional punching bag. I was just me, and that was enough. The next morning, I received a short email from Carla. It read, "Case officially closed. You can rest now." I smiled at the words, simple and kind. Rest. a luxury I hadn't known in years. Later that day, as I walked through the farmer's market, I saw a mother and daughter laughing by a fruit stand. The sight stirred something in me, not envy, not sorrow, just reflection. I would never have that kind of bond with my mother or sister, but I was finally okay with that. Some relationships aren't meant to be repaired, they're meant to be released. When I got home, I opened my windows to let the wind in. The scent of pine drifted through the rooms, brushing over the stack of papers I'd left on my desk. I picked up the ledger one last time, placed it inside a box with the case file, and sealed it shut. Then I carried the box to the attic and left it there. That chapter was over. As evening fell, I lit a candle and sat by the window, watching ripples cross the lake under the fading light. My phone buzzed once, a new message from an unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. It was from my mother. "We made mistakes. Please come home for Christmas. Let's start over." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my reflection faint in the glass. There was a time when that message would have broken me, but now it felt hollow. I typed 3 words, "I wish you well," and hit send. Then I turned off my phone. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, melting against the warm porch railing. I stood there, watching the soft white drift across the dark lake. The cold air bit at my skin, but inside I was warm. I finally understood that peace wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about no longer needing the past to make sense. When I went back inside, I poured the last of my wine, sat by the window, and whispered to myself, "It's over." For the first time, I believed it.